Hey everybody, it's Brad. Today we're working with Floriani Total Control U, and we're going to be doing some extremely basic digitizing today. I have a lot of customers who've recently bought the software from me, and I wanted to make a video actually that goes along with a class that I taught a little less than a month ago for my new people, and everybody really liked it. So we are going to do some super easy stuff here, and I'm going to show you the way to get the best results for your first designs that you digitize. So let's get started. At your My Floriani Today page, we're going to hit Create a New Design, and that'll take us to our design page here, where we have everything that will end up being digitized is going to be in this area. But we are going to get some artwork first. So what we're going to be working with is artwork that already has outlines that can just be converted directly into stitches. And the place I want you to go is up to your custom shapes folder. It's got like a little picture of a flower on it. You're going to left click on that. And in here we've got some shapes. Now these shapes are artwork, and we could convert them directly into stitches, but they're a little basic, and they'd only be one color at a time. So let's go ahead and change the folder that our custom shapes is looking in. We're going to left click on this little arrow here and choose Easy Art. Now everything in this folder is already traced, meaning it already has the outlines that the software needs to convert something into stitches. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, don't worry about it too much. Just know that this stuff in this folder can be converted directly to embroidery without us having to draw anything. So we're going to start with this little helicopter here. So just left click on your helicopter and it will show up in your design field. So this looks like a picture, looks like a graphic, but what this actually is a vector file, meaning it's made of outlines. If I go up to the properties and uncheck the fill here, we can see that this is just outlines. The fill is just there for our visual aid so that we can see what it is. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm just going to roll with my mouse wheel. Okay. And I want to show you a handy tool that is built into your software that will allow you to know what type of stitch any given area ought to be digitized as. So that is the ruler tool over here on the left. Just looks like a ruler. If you left click on it and then just left click and drag between any 2 points. So if we go and we say take the widest area of the windscreen here and left click and drag it down. The tooltip there tells you the distance, but it also recommends a stitch type. So for this area, it's recommending that we use a fill. And I can do the same thing on any part of this design, and it tells me to use a satin for this part. And so on as it goes down through the design. So that is going to be our reference for what type of stitch we're going to apply to each of these areas. And then we're going to apply those stitches to them. And then I'm going to show you what the design looks like after we sew it out. So let's go ahead and take a look at the bottom right-hand part of the screen. This is the sequence view. This is both what order the designs will sew out, and if we hit the little arrow or little plus sign next to any of these objects, it shows us each piece that makes up the entire design. And we can also reorder these. We can move them from one position to another, which we'll be doing in other videos. But for this video, I'm just going to go ahead and digitize this in the order that the artwork is. We're not going to worry about reordering stuff. Now, that's not, strictly speaking, the best way to do it. But like I said, I want to get you digitizing without any kind of complications. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at the various the various objects in our sequence view. So if we take a look at the first color group, that's the body. And if we look at the breakdown here where I've hit the plus sign, we can see that there are 3 pieces that make this up. The first one here is this little teeny tiny square that is holding the wheel to the body. And then the next one is the wheel itself, and then the greater part of the body. And we can see that it selects each object in our design field when we select it in the sequence view. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this this piece of our design. We have two ways to do that. We can just, well, there's a number of ways. We could scroll in with our mouse wheel, and that's zooming me in and out. I could left click on this little magnifying glass in the selection box, and that zooms me way, way, way in. If you look up here, we are at 10,000% zoom, so for smaller objects, sometimes it's not practical to zoom in quite this far. But let's roll out just a little tiny bit, and let's measure with the ruler what it thinks we should use for this shape. Okay, it's telling us to use a satin stitch. Generally speaking, anything that is narrow is going to be told to be a satin stitch. If it's around 10-ish millimeters is about the max for it to recommend a satin stitch. And then below this, it'll tell us to use either a bean run or a run. Sometimes when it's telling you to use a run stitch, you have to use a run stitch a little bit differently. You can't just convert a box into a run stitch, but I don't mean to be getting into complicated things. This tells us to use a satin stitch, so that's what we're going to do. And if we take a look down at our digitizing tools down at the bottom, you see how these are all grayed out and I can't click on them? The reason for that is if you look at the tool that I have selected, it's the ruler tool. And when you have the ruler tool selected, even though this object is technically being selected right now, it doesn't allow us to make any changes to it unless we have the select tool selected up here. So we're going to go up and left click on our select tool. Now all of our digitizing icons are highlighted, and it can be really confusing when you first get started because there's a million of these, but we're only going to worry about 3 tools for this entire design. Okay, so we're going to, and for the most part it's only going to be 2. So the first one is the standard fill. That's this one. I know my tooltip is hovering off of your screen there, but if you hover over this purple star here, it'll say standard fill. And then the next one to the left is auto satin. We're going to be using that a lot. If I hover up here, you kind of can see that. Auto satin, we're going to use that a lot. And then we're going to skip all the other satin stitches and go straight to regular satin. So we're going to be working with satins and fills for this design. And so these are the only 3 tools that we're going to need: the standard fill, the auto satin, and the regular satin stitch. The difference between auto satin and regular satin is the auto satin will make your stitches automatically. The regular satin, you have to tell it what direction you want the stitches to go. So let's go ahead and just click on this button and see what happens. Auto satin. So if it says satin, first thing we're going to try is auto satin. Boom. Okay, so it's put some stitches in. The stitches are going vertically, so they're just going to go straight up and down. And they look super low density, and that's okay because remember we were zoomed in at about over 1,000% here, so we want those to look kind of loose at that level of zoom. Now that's probably not the I might actually have those go in the other direction if it were me, but we're gonna just let the software do what it does for the most part for this video. So that's our first object has been generated, and if you notice it's blue, that's because it's selected. If you have stitches selected, they turn blue. Okay, so if I click off of it, we can see that it's actually green. And you can, if you want to get rid of the blue highlights, which I actually can't stand that it does that, but some people like it. If you want to turn that off, you hit Tools up here at the top, go down to Preferences, and under View, remove the check mark next to Highlight Selection, or you could change the color to a color that's more pleasing to you. I can't stand it, so I'm turning it off. Alright, so let's take a look at the next object in our sequence is this circle. So we get our ruler tool, and we're going to measure from one end of the circle to the other, and it is recommending a satin stitch here. And then if we go just a little bit further, quite a bit further actually, it recommends a fill. So it's telling us to do this as a satin. Let's go ahead and accede to its wishes. We're going to hit the auto satin tool again, and it has generated a satin stitch here. But if you look, it has not gone all the way to the ends of our shape. And there's a couple of different ways that we can solve this. If we say resize it a little tiny bit, it forces it to recalculate the stitches. See, that got us some more stitches over on this side, but not on this side. I'm going to hit undo here. Or we could increase the density of it. which is going to make it fill in a little bit closer together. Let's go ahead and hit that and hit apply, see what that does. See, that gives me a little bit more of a fill in there, and hit apply again, and that gives it a little bit more, but it still just isn't filling out my entire shape. So what I think I'm going to do is, instead of using this as a satin, I'm going to go ahead and do it as a fill against its recommendations and see how that gives me much more of a rounded shape. So that is what I'm going to do for things that don't kind of generate exactly right. You can kind of make it a fill, and it'll even it out for you. All right, so next we've got this big giant thing. Now, we know that this is too big to be a satin stitch, but we can measure it and say, okay, we'll measure from here to here. It's going to be a fill. From here to here, it says to be a fill. So this whole thing is just, this has to be a fill. So we select this, and then use our select tool and hit the standard fill, just the first purple star, and that fills that whole thing in with stitches. Now let's look at the next object in the sequence view. Is going to be this little rear propeller thing, and if we hit the plus sign, it will allow us to see the individual pieces that make this up. So we've got the first area here. Let's measure it, and we want to pick kind of the widest part, and it says to use it as a satin stitch. So we're going to use the auto satin tool, and boom, that digitized pretty well, so that's good. We go and get the next section, and that's going to be it's the same object, same shape, so we know that also needs to be an auto satin. Whoops, I just accidentally clicked on a color. Always can hit undo if you make a mistake. Right up here in the corner here. So we know this is going to be satin, so we auto satin that, and then the next one we auto satin that, and the next one we auto satin that. And down, we'll get this last guy. This is going to tell us to make this a satin stitch, but this round object is probably not going to be fully digitized all the way out to the ends, just like our other circle was. So you can kind of decide whether that looks okay to you, or whether you want it to be a fill instead. Either one will really work in this situation. Next object is our canopy. So this is alone in its color group. It's the only object in this color group. We already measured this, but this is a fill this direction, it's a fill this direction, so no matter what direction our stitches go, it wants it to be a fill. So we will oblige it by clicking on the standard fill icon, and there we go. And you can also have a little fun with some of these. So right now the stitch direction is going perfectly horizontally, which is the default stitch direction for a fill. But the kind of the direction of the glass, I think, kind of the curvature goes this way. So if we wanted to adjust the angle of these stitches, we can by using the shape tool. Now the shape tool, there's a shortcut to it at the bottom middle part of our selection box here. We're going to left click on that and just grab, see how this little yellow line is? We grab one of the ends of this yellow line and drag it in the direction we want our stitches to go. Then we can right click to generate that, and it adds a little bit of dimensionality to our design. And we're doing pretty basic stuff here, so any little bit of flourish we can get away with would be cool. So what's next in the sequence view? We'll look down. Okay, we've got this little gray part in here. Again, we know this is going to tell us to make it a satin stitch because of the size. We do that, and I'm satisfied with the way that that's going to look, I think. And let's go up to the propellers, which is next. So we've got 4 of these shapes, and these we can tell pretty much are going to be satin stitches, but let's measure the fattest one. Yep, says to use a satin. And we are going to go ahead and use the auto satin on it. Boom. Okay, that looks good. Go and pick our next object and use our auto satin tool. Now this one's a little wonky, okay? And you'll actually see when I show you my stitch outs later, I didn't fix this on the one that I stitched out. But if the stitch direction is going crazy like this, we can bring up the stitch direction for a satin stitch just the same way that we did a fill stitch. So we're going to left click on our shape tool here, and we can see that one of the stitch directions is kind of going in a weird direction. We don't want the stitches to be going this way out here, so all we have to do is grab this end of our stitch direction. It's also called an inclination, that's what the software calls it, and drag it so that it's going straight up and down at this part. We're going to right click to generate that, and we can see how that straightens out mess that it had made. So sometimes the Auto Satin tool doesn't perform perfectly, but we have the tools to go in and fix anything that it does. Now, I mentioned that there is also another button that we may use, and that's the regular satin button. I'm going to show you how that works. So we're going to select our next object in the sequence view, and this time we're going to hit the satin button. And what we get is an outline shows up in purple, and then our cursor has this little black ball on it. What we can do with this is choose what direction the stitches go so that we don't have to worry about the software making a mistake and digitizing something going off in the wrong direction or something. And then we right click to generate that. You right click twice actually, and there we have our completed element. Okay, go down and select our next object, and I'm going to go ahead and just auto satin it, and of course it messes it up, so we go in and have to bring it back, fix that stitch direction, right click again, and there we go. We've got a nice pretty satin stitch going in there. And now we go down and we've got this guy. He's going to be a satin stitch. I can measure it to confirm. Yeah, satin. And we're going to go ahead and use the auto satin for that. And then we've got this light green stripe here as our last object to be digitized. So we're going to go ahead and use the auto satin on that, see how it does. Actually, it looks pretty good. It did a nice job on that, so we don't need to go in and fix that. And that is our design. This is technically an embroidery design. We could hit File and save it as a PES or a JEF or whatever format your machine uses, and go and sew it out. Now, if we were to do that, this design wouldn't be super great for a number of reasons. But one of the big reasons is that the stitches where the borders between fills, particularly between the canopy and the body of the helicopter, there's going to be a big gap. And let me show you why. I'm going to turn off my 3D, which you may or may not have had on this whole time. This button right here is your 3D. So I guess I should have mentioned that I had mine in 3D. I do that so that you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, that's why yours looks different than mine if yours looks like this the whole time. But I'm going to zoom in on this area, and we're going to take a look at where the stitches meet. So I just used my magnifying glass and left-clicked and dragged. But as we can see, that there's not a whole heck of a lot of overlap between these two areas, and there's no overlap at all on the underlay. So the underlay of this is not overlapping this at all, and the stitch points are just barely touching. And that is a recipe for there to be gapping. So there will be a gap between here and here. That's going to be the biggest problem that we're going to have with this design, is that gap between there and there. But there's also some other minor problems that will arise. Namely, a satin stitch should always be drawn a little tiny bit wider than you want it to be. So if we want our embroidery to mimic our artwork exactly, converting the artwork directly into satin stitches will make them look narrower when we actually sew them out than we intended them to be, because satin stitches naturally pull together and create a tighter looking stitch. So what we want is these to be a little bit wider. Now there's a number of ways that we could achieve this. We could manually go in and set what are called pull compensation values and push compensation values, and adjust our density settings and adjust what underlay settings we're using and all of that groovy stuff. But there is a feature built into this program that does all of that for us. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the File menu. And instead of choosing regular save, we're going to do save to sew. And what this is going to do, I'm going to left click on that. This is basically a wizard that we go in and input a little bit of information, and it will adjust our design in a number of ways for us. So the first thing is you have to tell it the type of fabric you're going to sew the design out on. So there's a lot of choices here. You kind of pick what is the closest to what you're doing. But if you don't know what design or what fabric you're going to sew the design out on, if you're just digitizing it and then you're going to sew it out on a variety of different things, a good choice with good all-around settings that work for a lot of things is the PK knit setting. here. So right towards the middle, we've got this PK knit as one of the options. And we digitize this design, so we want to make sure that we choose I digitized. If it's a design that you didn't digitize, then you choose I didn't digitize, meaning an existing stitch file. But we digitized this, so we left click on that. And then we want to put a check mark next to new style settings, otherwise we're not really doing anything here. And then we do not want to convert this to outlines, so we're going to leave this on a check because it already is outlines. But anyway, so we put that check there, PK knit I digitized, or if you're going to sew it out on something else, choose whatever you're going to sew it out on. And then we're going to hit next here. And at this point, it is going to show me what type of stabilizer it recommends I use. And because I told it that I'm doing it on a PK knit, it's telling me to use a no-show mesh on the back and to hoop the stabilizer with the item and to use a little bit of heat and gone topper. So if you have some type of material that you don't know how you ought to embroider, you can tell it that you're going to use whatever type of whatever type of material, and it will recommend a stabilizer for you. You can also click on these, and it will bring up a YouTube video explaining how to use. Well, I guess I can't really complain about there being ads in a YouTube video, huh? Considering I put ads in mine. But apparently RNK wants to make a little money on their ads. So anyway, there we go. So it opens up a video that will show us how to use the recommended type of stabilizer. Right, okay, that's enough. Anyway, so it does that for the various types of stabilizer that it recommends, and we just hit finish, and we need to go ahead and tell it where we want to save this, and hit save. And now it has gone in and changed a number of settings about my design, namely pull compensation, push compensation, stitch density, and underlay. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the area we were looking at before, and we can already see how much of an overlap there is now. But I'm going to turn off 3D so we can see where our stitch points are. We can see now that our stitch points of our silver are extending into the fill of our green and vice versa, and it's almost in enough to catch this edge of the underlay, which is what I like to do when I'm doing it myself. But the difference that's going to make is enormous. Okay, that is going to go from having a big gap to having no gap without us having to really know how to do it. So I really like the ability to use that save to sew feature. Now, for my own designs, I tend to compensate for my own amount of pulls and stuff that I do. But I tell you what, I bet you in a lot of the situations, the save to sew would probably do a better job than I do. So let's take a look at exactly what it's done by hitting the undo button. So keep an eye on this area. We're going to hit undo and look at how big a difference that is. The whole thing just seems to expand. And yet when we sew it out, it's going to look just like the original artwork. It's going to actually compensate for the amount that the fabric is going to get pulled in and allow our design to appear the size that we intend it to. This time let's look at the satin stitches. We're going to hit undo, then we're going to hit redo. Undo, redo. Okay, so that's showing me what my save to sew did for me. When you're first getting started, this can save you a lot of frustration. Okay, so doing the save to sew. So here, I'm going to actually show you now the difference between sewing out with and without the save to sew. So take a look at this. We can see that in the top chopper, the canopy is separated, and the propeller things, the propeller blades, I was trying to think of the name for what that is on a helicopter. Anyway, are narrower than they are on the one on the bottom. And that's pretty much what it did for us, is it made it so there's no gaps, and it made our satin stitches the right width. Now you may notice that I didn't actually fix the the stitch direction in mine when I sewed it out. Yeah, I forgot to, but anyway, so back to the software here. So that is a quick and easy way to learn how to digitize a design. Now, you may be saying, okay, Brad, that's great for digitizing these things that come with the software, but I don't want to digitize a beach ball or a crashing wave or an anchor. I want to digitize my favorite sports team's logo, or I want to digitize, whatever other thing you may want to digitize. Well, we can still do this with starting from artwork that you download from the internet that's like a JPEG, or something that you draw and you take a picture of, or something like that. It is possible to do this, and I am going to show you how. All right, so hit create a new design up in the top left-hand corner, and we are going to get we're going to use a wizard to create a vector image from a JPEG. Now, this only works with super, super clean artwork, so it needs to be very clear and defined outlines, and it's not going to work from like a photograph or something like that. So it has to be something that's like a logo or something. Sports team logos work great for practicing this, but you'll see what I do when we do this. So we go up here to this wizard hat. This is where the wizards live in Floriani. We hit the arrow under it, and I want to choose Auto Artwork Wizard. It's the third one over. We're going to left click on that. And here we have to select an image. So we click on Select Image, and by default it looks in Floriani's image folder, but you're going to need to navigate to wherever a picture you have is. And the picture that I have is the Ravens logo. I live in Baltimore, so we're going to do that. Now, caveat here, if you're planning on trying to do this and sell stuff, don't do Ravens logos and stuff like that. Don't do sports logos unless you have a license to do so. Make this for your own personal use, I think is fine. But all right, so we've cropped our image down a little tiny bit. I just moved these black dots. Sorry, I kind of did it without saying what I was doing, but I moved these black dots so that the shaded area is more or less just over my my logo only. And then the size over here, we want to leave this as big as possible. So don't adjust this. You always want to work from as large an image as you can when you're doing this, because once it's vectorized, we can size it to whatever size we want it to be. So let's hit next. And at this point, there is a step that we have to do to make it so that the background is a different color, because the background is going to be removed, and anything that is the color of the background is going to be removed. So that means that the beak would get removed if it and the background are white. Okay, so we have to hit Edit Image here. Oh, make this screen a little smaller so you guys can see it. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up in Paint. There we go. And all we have to do is select a color in our color palette up here that is not in the design. So this bright green will work. And then we use the fill with color, looks like a bucket, and we just fill the background color with something that's not in the design, right? So that's all I've done here, and then we can just exit, and when it prompts us, hit save. So now we've got a green background. It's going to take the green out and leave the white in the beak. We hit next again, and here we're going to just hit finish, and there is our artwork. Okay, so this is the same thing as one of those easy art things that I was working with earlier, in that every piece of this is already traced for us. Okay, so we're going to size this down a bit. I could go over here to transform and choose a size. Right now it's 21 inches. That's a little large. So let's make that smaller. By the way, if you want to switch between inches and metric in this menu right here, inches, metric, let's make this something more reasonable, like 6 inches wide, and hit apply. And we'll go ahead and do the exact same thing we did last time. We are going to look at each object and determine what type of stitch it should be. Now, this one is a little bit tricky because it's narrow around the edges here, but then there's parts where the stitches are going in several different directions, and here we've got kind of a wide open space. So this, because it's all one piece, this has to be a fill. And if we measure, we always want to measure kind of like the widest part of an object. And that's telling us to use a fill here in the middle, and it's telling us to use a satin here on the edge, but it's all one part. It's all one object, so it has to be a fill. Now, in real life, if I was digitizing this, I wouldn't do this as one piece. But because we're working from automatically generated artwork, we don't really have a choice. So we're going to go ahead and do this as a standard fill. Boom. Okay, so then we've got the little swooshes inside of the B. So let's take a look and see what it recommends for that. Find kind of the widest part. It says to use a satin. Okay, so what do we use for that? Auto satin is the first thing we try, and that looks good. Same thing for the other one, auto satin. That looks good. And then we've got the dot on the inside of his eye. I'm going to make that a fill. It's up to you. Then we've got the outside of his eye, which is 2. This is actually different than the one that I did last time on this. Let's see what this does as a satin. Let's see if it's able to split it up as a satin stitch. Turn that into 3D and take a look. Yeah, it kind of looks wonky. Maybe I can fix it with the stitch directions. Yeah, we can add a stitch direction right here, and this will probably work. So if you've got an object like this that you hit a satin and you think that it could look good, but it doesn't, you can move the inclinations around all you want, but if you need another inclination, see, that kind of fixed this part a little bit, but if you need another inclination, we need another inclination right here. We actually have to go over to the left-hand toolbar. You see this little shape tool? This is the main shape tool. The other one we're using is kind of a shortcut. And we can hit the arrow under it and choose this middle option, add inclination. That allows us to draw in a new inclination in a shape. And there we go. That looks pretty good. We could actually do with another one over here. Yeah, that looks quite good actually. All right, so we've gone ahead and taken care of that. Next, we've got this outer outline, and this is also tricky because there are going to be parts that we measure that's going to tell us to use a satin, but from here to here is a spot that we have to measure, and that's telling us to use a fill. So this whole outer part is going to have to be a fill. And again, this is the kind of thing that if I was digitizing this myself, I wouldn't do it all as one piece, and I would probably use a satin stitch for that. But we have to work with the artwork that we've got and the skill set that we've got when we first start out. And then we've got like what's this little? Sometimes you'll get a little artifact like this. This is nothing. This guy does not actually do anything. We're just going to delete that. And okay, so we've got the swoosh. Oops, we'll measure that. It's widest part. Use a satin. Okay, says to use a satin, so we're going to go for it. Auto satin that puppy. All right, very good. And this part, the B, at the bottom part of the B. Whoops. Well, I didn't mean to make it a satin because I think, yeah, that is recommending a fill. So if we do this as a satin, then what happens is it's so wide that it actually has to split the satin column. So if you don't mind this little bit of bumpiness, you can leave it as a satin, or you can look at it and say, you know, this would probably look better as a fill. And then if you do that, then you may choose to go back and change this part to a fill. It's up to you, really. I mean, whatever you think looks better, you're the one doing it. Okay, so we've got this big part here that's obviously going to be a fill. And what are these? Okay, these are parts inside the B. We'll make those a fill too, so they contrast with the satin of the swoosh. And then we've got some white areas. We've got the outer part of the B. Now this is probably a little complex for our auto satin tool. This should be a satin stitch. Let's see what it does with it. Yeah, it kind of messes it up a bit. Now we could go in here and figure out how to fix these inclinations. Oh, let me just zoom over to it here, using my arrow keys to pan. All right, so we could fix this. Let's see. There's a couple different options we have here. We could make it so that the stitches go like this. So I'm moving my stitch directions, and we can make it so that it kind of bends around that. Let me right-click to generate that, show you what that looks like. So that's okay. Like, that'll work. Or the other thing we could do is get even more advanced here and slice this. So if we go in here and we do our shape tool and we choose this last one, split line, and we drag from here to here, it'll actually split this shape and allow us to have two separate satin stitches there, which is probably the more elegant solution. So that is that part. Now, again, if you're not comfortable doing what I just did, you could have just made it a fill, right? So, I mean, it'll still work. It'll still look good. Still, you know, 95% of the people that see it are going to think that it looks amazing, you know, whereas I would look at it and be like, why'd you use a fill there? But, you know, it always amazes me when, you know, what I think is like my worst work, and everybody, you know, people are like, wow, that looks amazing. I'm like, no, really, it looks terrible. But anyway, so I just digitized this one, this inside part of the the eye as a satin, and then this part of the little D shape inside the B, that's going to be a auto satin as well. So here is our design, and we could sew this out and it would look okay. But what are we going to have? We are going to have big gaps in here, big time. Gapping all around. This isn't even touching. There's just going to be a big giant gap in there. So what do? We go in and we use our Save to Sew. So we go to File, Save to Sew. We tell it what type of material we're using, and say I was looking for T-shirt. I remember T-shirt is in a weird place. Knit T-shirt. There we go. It's under K. T-shirt is under K for I digitized. There we go. And we apply new style settings. Let's see if it tells us to do it a little bit differently this time. We're gonna hit next, and actually probably not, because a PK knit is once the same kind of stabilizer. Well, but anyway, you get the idea. It tells us based on what we choose, what type of stabilizer to use, and we can hit finish here, and we name it something, and we hit save. Okay, so let's go and take a look at our areas. Again, we can see that they are nice and overlapped now, and that this is going to sew out much more nicely. We'll go ahead and undo and see the changes. Boom. Boom. Very different. Completely different underlays, different density settings, and pull compensation has been applied. So now let's take a look at the difference between the one that I did without using Save to Sew, and there's gapping all over the place and it looks terrible, and the one that we did using Save to Sew and it looks much better. So anyway, I hope this video gets you started a little bit. If you're just getting started with the software and are intimidated by the 1,000 buttons that it presents you, you can really get away with a lot using just 2 or 3 buttons in the entire software to make an interesting looking design. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.